All right. Hopefully you had time to answer the bellwork question. What is ecology? Not just what is it, but how would you define it based upon this picture that you see here? And there can be multiple different answers, that's fine. But I mean, obviously, according to your notes, the very next line is the definition, the actual definition. So don't change your definition, just compare it to the actual one, okay? Just make a comparison. But you will not get credit for that bellwork unless you have your answer written down. All right, so what is indeed ecology? And it's the scientific study of how living organisms interact with their environment, both the living parts and the non-living parts, okay? So what are these factors? What factors, biotic and abiotic, we're going to define those in a moment. Biotic means living, and abiotic means non-living, okay? So which factors in here are living, which are non-living, and what are they that the lizard is interacting with? So that's a question you have to answer. So what do we have here? We have water. We have the leaf. The leaf is biotic. The water is abiotic. Can you see anything else? How are you seeing this lizard through the leaf? What's shining on the leaf? Sunlight, okay? So sunlight is definitely an abiotic factor. And you can't see the air, but you know the air is there, so the air is also an abiotic factor. I don't see any other living things, so there's no other biotic factors. So we're going to talk now about the levels of organization in ecology, okay? In an ecological definition. So there's the lowest level, or the smallest level, is the individual organism. And so that's a single living thing. And now you have to write the example down for this in your notes. So what is that organism called? And don't just say fish. What kind of fish? Don't say Nemo fish. What kind of fish? It's a clownfish, okay? I would accept anemone fish, but specifically there are other types of anemone fish, so this is a clownfish. So if you go up a level in organization, you're going to go to a population. And a population, as you can see, is a group of organisms of all the same species. So the population of people in this room, the population of cockroaches in Spanish River High School, the population of iguanas in Boca Raton. You see, it's all the same species. That's what a population is. And so the example would be a school of coral, a clownfish, okay? A school of clownfish. You could also say all the clownfish living in a coral reef. The next level is a community. So now you can see we have different species, but they're all living in the same habitat, okay? So all of the organisms in all the populations that live in the same place. So we've got individual, we've got population, and then we've got community, different populations. So going back to my example, all the people, all the cockroaches, and all the iguanas make a community of organisms in Boca Raton. So the next level up is an ecosystem. And this is the entire system of interactions in that community. So this is both the physical, non-living things and the living biotic things, okay, in the environment. So what can you see here? This would be called a coral reef ecosystem. And you could see living things like corals and anemones, sponges, echinoderms, that's a sea star, a vertebrate like a fish, Those are all the living things, the biotic factors, and then the abiotic factors are what? Call them out. What are the abiotic factors? Water, right? Sunlight, and sand, okay? Then the next level up is a biome. So now you've got the coral reefs across the entire surface of the planet. And that would be a biome, a group of ecosystems that share the same climate and have similar types of communities. So the other types of biomes would be taiga forest or arboreal forest, a forest that's up in northern Canada, okay, and Siberia and places like that. You could do tundra, estuaries, deserts, deciduous forests. Those are forests where the leaves fall, turn colors in the fall, and they fall every year, okay? So those are some examples. And then finally, we have the entire biosphere, or the living ball. Bio means living, sphere means ball. So the entire planet encompassing all of those biomes that I just mentioned together in one nice little package flying through space, okay? It's the highest level of organization, and it's the layer of Earth that goes from the deepest part of the ocean, even a little bit underneath the bottom, a little bit, to above the land where we're walking into the atmosphere, okay? So from the deep in the ocean to the high in the atmosphere, and it's found within most parts of the hydrosphere. Hydro means water. Lithosphere, litho means rock. And atmosphere, atmos means air. It's Greek. And so this is all of them in one picture right here. So you've got the individual. Anybody know what that creature is called? Don't say deer. It's related to a deer. In that it's I think it's an ungulate. Is that the right word? I don't remember. Anyway, it's an elk, or in the Native American wapiti, that's the name of an elk. And so then you've got multiple individuals of the same species living in the same place. It's a population. And then you've got, is that supposed to be a mountain lion? Okay, an owl, a beaver, a rabbit, and a moose, all living with the elk. That's your community. And then the ecosystem would be a mountain or arboreal forest ecosystem, or even alpine tundra is another. Alpine meaning mountain, tundra meaning cold, but there's trees here. Anyway, and then the biome, and then the biosphere. Okay, so the biome is where this type of environment is all around the planet, and then take that, combine it with all the other biomes, and you have the whole biosphere. All right, so this is a test yourself on page 10, slide 10, not page 10, sorry, but you are going to do this after the notes, okay? And it's just fill in the blanks. So now we're on slide 11, and we're talking about characteristics of the different ecosystems. What does an ecosystem look like? What are the parts that make it up? Okay, and the first one is they have biotic and abiotic factors. So we've kind of already defined this, so this is just a more formal definition. So remember, ecosystems have both living and non-living parts, or factors, biotic factors, abiotic factors. So the living parts are called biotic. And they include organisms, the organism's activities. So is this a biotic activity or abiotic? So like a landslide would be abiotic, but digging into the side of a mountain to make a hole for a den, that would be considered a biotic factor. And their life processes. And then the non-living parts are called abiotic factors. And those are all the physical things that we've already mentioned a little bit before. So dirt, rocks, sand, clay, mud, any gases that are in the air. Volcanic gases, gases coming from hydrothermal vents deep down in the ocean, the normal gases of nitrogen and oxygen and water vapor that are in the air, water either in solid form or liquid form or gaseous form, like I said, water vapor in the air, and sunlight, electricity, lightning, anything that's not alive or from a living thing is abiotic factors. So again, we're actually going to do part of this one together, and then you're going to do the rest later on your own, okay? So characteristics of ecosystems are still in that same topic. So you would put an A if it's an abiotic factor, and a B, capital B, if it's a biotic factor, okay? So temperature, which one is temperature? And that's obviously going to be abiotic, okay? How about sunlight? Also. Photosynthesis. It's not a living thing, but is it a behavior or something that a living thing carries out? Yes, so that's going to be biotic. How about type of soil? Dirt, what kind of things are in the dirt? That's going to be abiotic. How about predation? Like preying upon something like an eagle coming down and grabbing a fish. That's definitely biotic, right? So you got this. This is pretty easy. Some of these might get a little more challenging, but I think you can figure it out with your teammates or your classmates afterwards. All right, so we're on slide 13. The biotic and abiotic factors interact with each other in very complex ways. You've seen a food chain. You know what a food chain is. But then you can take multiple food chains and put them into a food web, and that's just the biotic factors. Now, if you took a food web, which is like multiple food chains that look like this on paper, and you add in the abiotic factors, now you're getting a lot more complicated, like pH and temperature and light levels and soil types and those kinds of things. So there are two types. There's biotic with abiotic. And an example would be plants, biotic, using sunlight, abiotic, for photosynthesis. Okay, that would be a type of interaction that would be living with non-living. So plants using sunlight for photosynthesis. Write that down. And then the other one would be living with living. So that would be biotic with biotic. And an example would be predator-prey interaction. So here you have a fox that caught a rabbit. Needs to feed its babies, okay? Just like when your parents go out to the grocery store and buy you a hamburger, okay? Their parents are feeding you an animal that they killed. Well, someone killed it and put it in the grocery store. Maybe it wasn't your parents. Okay, so these factors, these abiotic and biotic factors, are often called limiting factors because they limit the organisms that can live in the environment. So if I only have so much light, only so many plants can grow. That's why if you go into a deep forest, jungle type of situation, and you get below the canopy, down at the very bottom, there might not be too many plants growing because they can't get light. So light would be a limiting factor to the kinds of plants that could grow underneath the canopy. That's one example, okay? Another example would be amount of rainfall that limits the growth of the grass population, or limits a grass's population. How much of the grass can grow if the rainfall is too high or too low. Or if the grass population is low, it's going to limit the rabbit population. So that's why these factors are called limiting factors. Based upon the amount, it's going to limit down the line which organisms can survive. And then if a rabbit population is large or small, you're going to have different numbers of dens dug into the ground where the rabbits have their babies. So that's also going to affect the factors. Okay, number 2, an ecosystem must be self-sustaining. So there are 3 features in order to be self-sustaining. Self-sustaining means being able to function on its own. And the first one is a constant source of energy, either solar, okay, sunlight, or geothermal, like at a hydrothermal vent, down deep in the ocean, where these high temperature water is coming out of the ground and it's mineralized. All that dark stuff that looks like dirt, it's just dissolved minerals. And that's the basis of the food chain down there. But it's energy. Has to be a constant supply of energy. You cut off the energy source and you're no longer self-sustaining. The second one is the energy has to be captured and stored in organic molecules. If there's plenty of energy, but it's not being utilized in any way, then you can't have a functioning ecosystem. And this happens mainly by the process of, and you already know the answer, photosynthesis, where sunlight drives the intake of carbon dioxide and water, which produces oxygen and glucose. There's no oxygen coming out of here, but you know that there is. And this could also be chemosynthesis, which is what happens down in the bottom of the ocean in the hydrothermal vents, right? Okay, so matter, CHON, remember? Carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, and nitrogen. CHON. We could also say sponge. Remember sponge, like sponge cake? Sponge, which is sulfur and phosphorus thrown in there as well. But for now, we're just doing the main 4. Matter must be recycled. You can't just use these things up and then have a sustaining ecosystem. If you use up all the matter and take it away, then the ecosystem will not flourish, it will die. And this recycling has to be between populations and between the populations and their environment. So things have to decompose, break down, so that these elements can be recycled. Respiration has to occur, where we take in glucose and oxygen and breathe out, remember, or produce water and carbon dioxide. So it's a cycle, right? And then photosynthesis is the opposite of respiration. So the cycle, recycled over and over and over again. So decomposition, respiration, and photosynthesis. 3 important ways to recycle matter in ecosystems. So this is a picture of a fungus, okay, breaking down a dead log that fell on the forest floor. So that would be decomposition. If this didn't happen, and insects move in and other things just continually break it down until it recycles back and the new plants take those nutrients back up again. If you walked into a forest, you would just see thousands of years of wood just piled up and the ecosystem would die of dead wood. So characteristics, there are 3 minimum components. You need that. This is the summary, right? There are 3 minimum components to make an ecosystem self-sustaining. Constant energy source. So the example is, on your paper you have to write, there's 3 examples on the bottom of that page. Sun, light, okay, or solar energy, you choose. Producers, plants. So here we have a forest. And then decomposers, and that's just a mushroom. When you see a mushroom, that's only the reproductive parts of the organism. Most of the organism is underground, spread out really, really far. And that's just the reproductive part coming up that has spores that blow in the wind and grow elsewhere. All right, so here's a test yourself. You're going to work on this question later with the people at your table, as well as the next one. And we don't have too many slides left for part one. The whole entire slideshow is 123 slides long, but you can see the stop sign. We're only doing up to page 4, part 1 of your notes, okay? So the ecosystems have biodiversity. This is the third aspect. So the biodiversity, we know what diversity means. It means having a genetic variation spread throughout the population, right? So biodiversity means you've got many different species, or really it means if you're asking what the biodiversity is, are there a lot of species in the ecosystem, or are there a small number of species in the ecosystem? That's what biodiversity means, okay? So it's the number of species the ecosystem contains. And ecosystems with more biodiversity are more complex and tend to be more stable, because you can get something from the outside, like a volcanic eruption or a cold freeze, a hard freeze, or a heat wave or a tsunami or something like that. And maybe it'll only wipe out a third of the populations, different species, right? But if you still have the vast majority because you have a lot of biodiversity, then that ecosystem can snap back again. If you only had 5 organisms, let's say only, these things were in the ecosystem right there, and something bad happened to the environment, and you knock out a third of those, or half, then you've only got a very small amount left, and the chances of that ecosystem coming back to normal would be much lower, or would take a lot longer. And then other things can happen in that lot longer period. And then the fourth one is they have to contain habitats and niches. Some people say niches. I say niche. I'm a biologist. I learned it as niche, not niche, but either one is correct, okay? So a habitat is a place. I think you guys could have figured that one out on your own, where an organism lives, right? And they can be terrestrial, so write down the word terrestrial. That is a word that is often used, but a lot of people don't know exactly what it means, because they think, oh, extraterrestrial, it must be an alien. No, terrestrial just means you can walk on the land. It lives on the land, okay? Or it can live in the land. It could burrow, live in the soil. But so anything that's forest or desert or field, prairie, any of those, that would be terrestrial. Aquatic is anything that's in the water, fresh or salt. Marine means salt specifically. Aquatic is just wet. So anything living in streams, lakes, rivers, ponds, ocean, beach, anything. Marine habitats. So coral reefs and that type of thing. Or, and this is an interesting one. We've talked about parasitism and symbiosis before, but organisms that live in, like worms and stuff, or on another organism. So like fleas, or even moss growing on tree bark. You can find that right outside in the bus ramp on the trees out there. You'll find moss and something called a lichen living right out on this campus. Hopefully you won't find fleas on this campus. So look at all these habitats that you have to have habitats and niches or niches for an ecosystem to exist. So you've got, this is a termite mound. This is a beaver dam. Polar bears have to have the appropriate habitat. That's why when the ice is melting, the polar bears are going to lose their normal habitat. And this is barnacles and mussels growing on a pier at a beach or at the ocean. Hermit crabs, honeycombs for bees. So bees would need a place to make their honeycombs, a tree trunk or a hole in the ground or something like that. And then the moss living on the branches, for example. Okay? And so a niche is a role. It's a role or a position an organism plays in its environment. Everybody plays a role in their environment. You may be wondering what humanity's role is in the environment. And at this point in humanity's existence, we are the stewards. We have the ability to take care of the environment or neglect the environment. Okay? That's what a steward is. A steward is supposed to be the caretaker of something. But all the other organisms, they don't. They just live to exist, right? So it is the sum of an organism's interactions with its ecosystem. So you can see how complicated human interactions are. Just go outside and look around. Look what we've done to the planet. And an organism's niche is how it meets its needs for food, shelter, and reproduction. Now the key is just there to show you the size of a hummingbird nest. And usually hummingbirds make their nests out of spider silk. They'll go around to spider webs and collect it, much to the chagrin of the spiders. They don't like that, obviously, getting their webs destroyed, but that's what they do. And then he camouflaged it with little pieces of moss. So it's pretty cool. So food, shelter, and reproduction. Okay, all hummingbirds. So a niche of an organism includes things like how it gets its food, we said that already. Is it a producer? Is it a consumer? So is it a producer like a plant? Does it make its own food? Is it a consumer? Does it eat other things? Or is it a decomposer like a mushroom that breaks things down? How it reproduces? Is it sexual or asexual? What its breeding season is, and its mating behavior. So, yeah, I think we talked about this in evolution. I know we did, because there were different things that blocked certain species from mating with each other, and we talked about some of these things. When is it active? Is it active at night, which means nocturnal, or day, which means diurnal? And does it hibernate? Does it migrate? In the wintertime, does it go to sleep until the warm weather comes? Or does it move away like the birds flying south for the winter? So here's an example when you're getting this filled out down here. So he got one tree, a spruce tree, and it's color-coded to the different species of birds, different warblers, that feed at different sections so that they don't compete with each other. And so they each occupy their own niche or play their own role in their ecosystem based upon their species. And then a physical environment and providing resources for other organisms. So a gopher tortoise, we have gopher tortoises here in Florida, right in this community. They dig holes, right? But other things live inside those holes as well. So the gopher tortoise is providing a resource to other organisms. That's its role. And so here are some ecological niches. Migrating birds. They dig dens and how they raise their young, and they're nocturnal for the most part. And just a few others, okay? What they eat, this is just photosynthesizing a plant, providing nutrients for other things. Bats feed on the flowers. These flowers only open on this cactus at night so that bats and moths who are nocturnal can come in and pollinate. So, and then the butterflies pollinate in the daytime.